I want to share this passage of Scripture with you that I think is an outstanding example of how boundaries work in the Bible and with God. This is from John the 13th chapter. Before the Passover celebration, Jesus knew his hour had come to leave this world and return to his Father. He had loved his disciples during his earthly ministry, and now he loved them to the very end. It was time for supper, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything, and that he had come from God and would return to God. So he got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around him. When Jesus came to Simon Peter, Peter said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You don't understand what I'm doing now, but someday you will." "No," Peter protested, "you will never wash my feet." Jesus replied, "Unless I wash you, you won't belong to me." Simon Peter then exclaimed, "Then wash my hands and my head as well." "Lord, not just my feet." Jesus replied, "A person who has bathed all over doesn't need to wash except for his feet to be entirely clean. And you disciples are clean, but not all of you." This is where our foot washing ritual used to come from that we've gotten away from, but I want you to understand boundaries in action in this discourse. In an astounding object lesson in humility, the master of his disciples took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and went about the process of washing their feet. God made flesh, humbled himself to do the work of a servant, to demonstrate what humility looked like and set a standard for his disciples to follow. He says, "You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, because that's what I am. And since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you want to wash each other's feet. I've given you an example to follow. Do as I've done unto you." He comes to Peter, so he starts washing his disciples' feet. He comes to Peter, and a boundary conflict ensued. Peter loved Jesus too much to allow his teacher to be engaged in the servant's work on Peter's behalf. Peter took ownership of his physical boundary and asserted this ownership by denying Jesus the opportunity. "You ain't washing my feet. You ain't touching me." You can say it's beneath you, but I'm not going to allow you to do this. This is me, these are my feet, and you're not washing them because it ain't appropriate for you. I know you're the teacher, but I'm going to tell you that you're not allowed to put your hands on my feet because that's nasty and it's beneath you. Jesus didn't respond with aggressiveness or with manipulation. Son of God just got told what you're not going to do. He didn't check him. He didn't manipulate him. He did not demand, as the Son of God, "I'm going to do what I want with your feet. I gave you feet." He didn't berate Peter for presuming to instruct the master on the appropriate behavior, so that way Peter would back down. Instead, Jesus establishes his own boundary and leaves Peter with a choice. Peter said, "I don't want you to touch my feet." But Jesus was trying to do something to prepare his disciples for the work that was coming up. The form of preparation didn't make any sense to the disciples as it was taking place, but Jesus deemed it necessary. Jesus tells Peter that if you decide to decline to participate in this, you're not going to be equipped to participate in what I'm doing next. Yes, you have every right to establish this boundary, but I'm doing something here. If I don't wash your feet, if you don't experience, you're not going to be equipped to do what I've got up the road for y'all to do. So yeah, you got a boundary, and I'm not going to yell at you. I know you just decided that you was going to check the Son of God and tell him what, and try to make sure that you protected his honor. But if that's what you want to do, you need to understand, I'm doing something here. You decide to withdraw from it, you're not going to be able to be a part of what I'm doing. Another boundary. This is very similar, for example, to the time when Jesus spoke to some who had been following him and said they couldn't be his disciples unless they were willing to eat his flesh and drink his blood. He was setting forth conditions for the relationship and left it to them to decide if it was something that they wanted. Peter was left with the decision. He could say yes to Jesus' unconventional methods and continue in relationship with his master, or Peter could say no and not experience and participate in what his master was doing. This is a choice that we as believers and unbelievers are regularly faced with when engaged in relationship with God. God starts doing something that does not make sense. And we have to decide if we're going to go along with it, and maybe we'll understand it better by and by, or we're going to say, this don't make sense, I'm not doing it. We have boundaries. God respects our boundaries. God has boundaries. He expects us to respect his boundaries. When the two clash, he leaves it to us to decide if we're going to open our fences and let the bad out and the good in, or if we're going to maintain boundaries that keep the bad in and the good out.